for all joining me today for Urannah Information Day. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge that we are recording this from Yui country. Sovereignty here has never been ceded, and I would like to acknowledge the custodianship of ancestors both past, present and emerging, as well as their ongoing connection to country here where I stand. We are of course talking about Urannah, and that is Wiri and Biri country. So I'd like to acknowledge their ongoing fight and their ongoing custodianship of those lands, and acknowledge their ancestors both past, present and emerging as well. And we will be touching of course on the Wiri and Biri campaign around Urannah in today's talk. So where will Urannah Dam be? We speak a lot about Urannah Creek and why we are fighting to protect it from the threats of it being dammed. But before we start, let's just have a look at exactly where they're planning to inundate with water for this damming project. If we take a look at this map, we can start to orientate ourselves. Here we are today in Mackay, and if we have a look out here, this big green section here is Urannah National Park. So that would be an area that many of you would be familiar with, and it's a good place to start orientating ourselves from. So if we look here along the edge of Urannah National Park, this is the Urannah Creek coming down from the National Park, bringing those pristine rainforest waters down into Urannah Creek. And the area that they intend to inundate with this project is this pink area here. So this is the Burton River, the Mackay Creek wetlands, and of course Urannah Creek as well. And this area altogether makes up a nationally important wetlands of national importance that is in many ways should be a protected site. So let's start talking about the reasons that we believe and we know that it's so important that we protect Urannah Creek from threats to dam it. You would have heard us already talking about Irwin's turtle. First photographed by Australian icon Steve Irwin and his father back in 1990s, actually 1991. This turtle is only found in Urannah Creek. It's got a 25-kilometre range of Urannah Creek, and we're not finding this species anywhere else. So it's a special, unique and native species to the Burton Basin that needs our protection. I've been already touching on the fact that we do have pristine, clear, highly oxygenated waters flowing down from Urannah National Park into Urannah Creek. And this is really important for this special and unique species, Irwin's turtle, because it relies on the pristine waters of Urannah Creek to survive. And that's because it's a cochlear breather. So that means that it actually breathes out its bum. It's able to extract oxygen from the water in Urannah Creek, much like a fish. And this means that it's especially fragile, it's especially affected when water does get cut off, when that flow of water stops, it does get cut off, and therefore it reduces its level of oxygen. Of course, this does also get impacted by increased turbidity. So if we have an increased amount of sediment or sand in that water, these are all things that are going to have negative impacts on Irwin's turtle and its ability to survive and thrive. Essentially, building Urannah Dam is a risk to the ongoing survival and existence of Irwin's turtle in Australia and in the world. Urannah Creek Dam and plans to dam Urannah Creek do mean possible extinction for this very unique species, and as an animal, a creature that we've only known has been in existence for 30 years, we're only touching on the beginning of research into this unique turtle. It's important that we keep it around for generations to come. One of the other reasons that we're standing up to oppose plans to dam Urannah Creek is to protect our wetlands. Wetlands are really important ecosystems. They act as natural filtration systems, and the destruction of these wetlands has a really negative flow-on effect to other aspects of the environment, other flora and fauna that rely on healthy ecosystems to survive. When we're talking about the effects that Urannah Dam will have, we're talking specifically really about two different wetlands. So when I was showing you on the map before, I pointed out the Burton River, Urannah Creek and Mackay Creek aggregation area. And as I mentioned, that's a nationally important wetland. This wetland will be inundated by water if Urannah Dam is allowed to go ahead, and therefore it will be destroyed, removing that vital habitat and that vital filtration system from the mix. One of the other wetlands that are under threat here is the Bowling Green Bay wetland. So if we have a look at the impacts that Burton Falls Dam has already had on Bowling Green Bay wetlands, it has already started to put it at risk. When we look at Bowling Green Bay, there is this amazing, beautiful spit that comes out. This is the Bowling Green Bay spit. And as we cut off the flow of water down these river systems, so down the Burton, down the Broken, this affects the movement of sediment, and this impacts the integrity of this spit, which creates a bay and creates a protected region and protected area in which these wetlands can thrive. In the last number of years, we've seen approximately a 10-metre reduction in the width of this spit, and Urannah Dam, or the building of Urannah Dam, will actually just really compound those negative effects that we're already seeing. The fear is that once this spit breaks, we will see this bay be fragile to the effects of the ocean, and it will destroy this wetland that sits in this area, and thus destroying the habitat for many migratory birds, many fish, and numerous other species that rely on this beautiful and special ecosystem to survive. Maintaining and protecting water quality is another important reason that we are opposing plans to dam Urannah Creek. As I've already mentioned, we have pristine, clear rainforest waters that flow down from Youngla National Park into Urannah Creek, and these waters need to be protected for the health of our region and maintained for all downstream water users. I've mentioned Burton Falls Dam a few times already, and it's a great local reference point. Burton Falls Dam has seen an unforeseen decline, or rather the system below it has seen an unforeseen decline in water quality as a result of that damming project. Turbidity was never a real fear regarding that dam. However, for 150 kilometres downstream, water users see increased turbidity and also an increase of pollutants. As the flow of river systems downstream from Burton Falls Dam have been reduced and sometimes even cut off, we have seen that the pollutants that exist in that river system, whether it be from farming or whatever other causes may be around, those pollutants are no longer flushed out. So when a river naturally flows, it flushes out any pollutants in there. However, when it doesn't flow, we see the concentration of those pollutants increase. And this is something we do really need to be aware of and learn from if we are to plan for other dam projects in the region. It is insane not to learn from past mistakes. Plans to dam Urannah Creek has been championed by the proponent as for farmers. However, the evidence for this just doesn't add up. Damming Urannah Creek will reduce the flow of water within the Burton Basin, and therefore it's going to reduce groundwater recharge. Farmers rely on groundwater recharge to replenish their underground bores, and currently many farmers who will be affected by Urannah Dam pay an annual fee to pump water from available groundwater. However, what this is going to mean for many is that they are going to have to move to irrigation, and this means that you're paying per megalitre as opposed to a flat annual cost. So of course this is going to actually have quite negative economic effects for many farmers downstream from the proposed Urannah Dam. Increased irrigation has also been shown to raise the water table, and when you raise a water table you risk salinity. So when you have highly salty land or soil, you're reducing the yield of your crop and your ability to grow. So this is a huge fear for many farmers, especially those who are coastline, because if you are lying across the coast and you see a reduced groundwater recharge from your inland river systems, you are going to risk increased groundwater recharge from the ocean. And again, that is bringing salt water into your system, which is only going to have a negative effect for your ability to grow on your land. Alternatives are available though, and many farmers are in fact championing and are in fact backing alternatives such as sustainable water management schemes, whether that be through irrigation or other methods. The fact is that plans to dam Urannah Creek to just not add up economically. In fact, it makes no economic sense. Over the past 5 decades, many investigations have been carried out into putting a dam on Urannah Creek, and all of them have failed. This plan, in fact, is no different, and thanks to Mackay Conservation Group supporters and donors, last year we were able to hire Atlas Impact to do their own independent economic study of Bowen River Utilities' preliminary business case. Now, what that found was that they were looking at 26 cents benefit for every dollar cost. That means that the plan does not meet the most basic requirements of having a successful cost-benefit analysis. One of the reasons their plan failed is Bowen River Utilities, in their original preliminary business case, had tried to include a $700 million benefit for the Burton to Moranbah pipeline. This pipeline at this stage has received no formal funding approvals. In fact, it didn't even have a formal funding proposal. And its inclusion has been highly criticised by government bodies, including the Department of National Resources, Mining and Energy. So they've called out the inclusion of that pipeline in the preliminary business case as meaning that it didn't meet quite basic requirements of building Queensland, and they have criticised its inclusion. I will also mention that this failing cost-benefit analysis for Urannah Dam is in no means a standalone, and we are seeing a trend with spending of the National Water Infrastructure Development Fund that follows along these lines. Earlier this year, the Productivity Commission did highlight this issue in their draft water reform paper, and it should be recognised that we are seeing a trend in government spending when National Water Infrastructure Development Funds are handed out to projects that do not have a formal business case and do not meet the cost-benefit analysis requirements. At the beginning of this talk, I touched on cumulative impacts, pointing out where the Burton Falls Dam is and mentioning plans to raise the walls of that. Now, we do know the devastation that can come from poor water management and the over-allocation of a basin's water resources. We just need to look down south at what the Murray-Darling is experiencing right now. So as I mentioned, there are actually 4 dam projects currently proposed for the Burton Basin, none of which are being effectively looked at cumulatively. These include the Burton Falls wall raising, so their plans, as I mentioned, to raise that wall by 2 metres, Hell's Gate Dam, Big Rocks Weir, which is also a coordinated project at this time, and of course Urannah Dam, which we're here speaking about today. Now, this river system, the Burton Basin as a whole, desperately needs a thorough scientific investigation into its ecological requirements and the needs of all life that it supports. Looking at any of these projects individually does not do the basin any good. It risks us going down the same path that they have down at the Murray-Darling Basin, and it risks this very important resource for all life on Earth. We must, as I've mentioned, ensure that the Burton Basin does not face the same fate as more developed river systems, and we must stand up now and ensure we don't get to that point instead of trying to recover when it's already too late. The inundation area for Urannah Dam is, of course, Urannah Creek, and this is the traditional homelands of the Widi and Biri people. They're running their own campaign opposing Urannah Dam called Ancient Rivers, and I encourage you all to hop online at urannah.org.au, sign up to their newsletter so you can follow what actions they're taking to protect Urannah Creek from this horrific plan to dam it. I want to flag, while we are talking about traditional owner rights, that this is a culturally significant site for traditional owners. It holds a lot of cultural value within their community, and there's been a lack of adequate consultation with traditional owners regarding plans to dam. Now, this lack of respect for the importance of preservation and protection of their ancient cultural values and sacred sites that are still on their land today really does equal a form of cultural persecution, and we must see it for what it is. As ignoring the Widi and Biri people's connection to country and connection to Urannah Creek is very much a form of cultural persecution. I'm going to show you a short video now regarding the Ancient Rivers campaign by some traditional owners, and as I said, I encourage you all to follow along with what they're doing and what their campaign.
That's our creation, that's everything. My family, my uncles, my grandfather, we all come from a line of artists that told stories and depicted history. And what we do today, we tell it in a story about who we are and where we still are today. From the changes of society and development and everything, but the land still exists. So we paint the land as a map of our country. As descendants of our ancestors today, we have to stand up and we have to fight for that sacredness of our rivers and try to stop, these practices of mining in our country. And the significance of the river runs all the way to the ocean, so our connection is right through the river system. It is the people's decision whether this dam should go ahead or not. And we've got scientists, we've got other allies, like different groups that are working with this, conservation groups from all over Australia, who are prepared to get, EISs and proper information and the facts out there to stop this project from going ahead and make, creating awareness to everybody that, Urannah is not just a place that can be dammed. Urannah is a special place. This is a large sensitive area in this country and it should not be dammed or mined. We're asking for support for people to come out and play a part so the wider community are aware of what's at stake here. Man, is it getting hot out here or what? Hey. In our language we say ganda. Ganda in our language means to fight. We will fight no matter what it takes in this modern day world to secure the sacredness of our country and what it has provided us for thousands and thousands of years from our ancient culture. And our children and our future generations will understand where we are today in this modern world, that places like this will not be destroyed or impacted by any development or infrastructure that is not going to be sustainable within our country. And once again, we say Ganda, which means we will fight till the end.
So where's the Urannah project at and where are we going? I'm going to start with March 2014, when Innovative Capital was formed. This is John Cotter Jr.'s company, who is the co-director of this business, and I mention it because we do see some of our initial funding for Urannah Dam come through Innovative Capital. That happens for the first time in March 2018 when we see the federal government commit $3 million to a feasibility study. And that money was secured by a consortium which was made up of Bowen Collinsville Enterprises and Initiative Capital. In August 2019, we see who we now know as Bowen River Utilities formally formed, and they're of course the proponents that we know for Urannah Dam. John Cotter Jr. is also the director of that business and 100% shareholder. In 2019, Bowen Collinsville Enterprises, so the same body we saw back in 2018, is granted $10 million to develop an environmental approvals and a business case for the Urannah Dam project. And it's worth pointing out that that funding was then given or handed over to Urannah Water Scheme, which goes under the umbrella of Bowen River Utilities to complete essentially their own feasibility study, though of course there was actually nothing legally wrong with that. In May 2020, we see Urannah Dam announced as a coordinated project by Queensland Government. A coordinated project simply means that it is going to need bilateral coordination from different government bodies. It actually doesn't assert that this project has in any way been approved or in any way is being supported by the government. It's important to note that that's the definition of a coordinated project, is just that it is going to need that cross-government, different department coordination in order to move it through. 27th of May 2020, we see Bowen River Utilities publish their preliminary business case, and then it was in October later that year that our independent economic analysis of the preliminary business case came out, and of course that found the project to be unfeasible with a 26 cents benefit to every dollar cost, and I touched on that earlier. On the 28th of November 2020, we see the Coordinator General publish the draft terms of reference, and many of you out there in the group would have been involved in sending submissions regarding that draft terms of reference, and of course that closed on the 24th of January 2021, and we had a great response from all our members and beyond, so I'd like to thank you. I believe we sent over 100 submissions from this organisation alone, so that's really great to see. Of course, on the 21st of April 2021, so just recently, we saw the terms of reference for the environmental impact statement come out. So of course that was taking into account what everyone had submitted, and now the Coordinator General has put forward the terms of reference for a future environmental impact statement. So where are we going? What have we got coming up? Bowen River Utilities now has 18 months to produce a draft environmental impact statement which meets that term of reference. After they've put that out, there's a 6 to 8 weeks allowed for the Coordinator General to release the draft for public comment. So of course we have 6 to 8 weeks to respond, and that will be an opportunity for people to send submissions once again. From there, the Coordinator General will put to Bowen River Utilities the changes required in their environmental impact statement, and then Bowen River Utilities will produce the supplementary environmental impact statement. So this is really a final kind of response, because it's then that the Coordinator General will make their recommendation to the state and Commonwealth governments about the project. Does he believe that they have adequately met the terms of reference? Does he believe this project should go ahead? Of course, the Federal Environment Minister does not need to listen to these recommendations, and we have seen that projects have stopped before at this point. The Federal Environmental Minister approves the project or doesn't approve the project. They can also add further conditions on top of what the Coordinator General has suggested, and this will be based on the EPBC Act. Of course, once all of that happens, it really comes down to, does the proponent have the money to start the project? And looming over all of this, of course, we have the federal election announcement, which we're not exactly sure when that is yet, but we can start seeing people campaign towards that already. Opportunities that we can see to get involved in this moving forwards. We do, of course, as I said, opportunity for submission here, and whether the proponent can start work if they have the funds. So where are these funds coming from? It must not only be government funded. We will see private funding come through as well if that project is to go ahead, and there will be great opportunity for Mackay Conservation Group supporters and those opposed to the dam to get involved there as well.
My name's Nigel. I work for World Wildlife Fund here in Brisbane. I'm heavily engaged in water planning activities across Queensland, and just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up on the Burton Basin Water Plan, which is the statutory instrument underneath our state's Water Act that basically manages surface, underground water and overland flow in the Burton Basin. So the Burton Basin Water Plan was first established in 2007. And as it's a statutory subservient document to the Water Act, there's a requirement that it has to be replaced and reviewed every 10 years. However, the minister does have the option to extend the life of a water plan by up to 10 years, subject to everything traveling okay under the provisions in the water plan. So the Burton Basin Water Plan was due to be renewed in 2007. The department missed that, and then in 2019 there was a decision made by the then minister to extend the life of the plan by another 5 years, so it's now scheduled to be reviewed in 2023. So how does the Burton Basin Water Plan sort of tie back to Urannah, well, and other dams? So in order to get the water allocations for dams and other water infrastructure, it needs to be authorised underneath a water plan. So the current Burton Basin Water Plan does have an allocation for Urannah Dam. It's got 150 gigalitre allocation, but that allocation was basically put in 2007, and of course there's a whole bunch of things changed in regard to water availability in the Burton, mainly driven by climate change. So when a water plan is reviewed and replaced, there's a requirement that the bureaucrats have got to utilise best available science to underpin any decisions made about water availability over the 10-year forward life of a water plan when they're renewing it. And also very much backed by an amendment that I managed to get put into the Water Act a couple of years ago, which now specifically requires the minister to consider the implications of climate change on the availability of water going forward over the life of a water plan. Prior to that, all of the bureaucrats used to do when they were doing the modelling in regarding availability or potential availability of water in a water plan area was relied upon the historical records. So for the Burton, that's like 125 years. And my argument was in regard to climate change, we're entering unknown territory, so we don't really know or understand what the likely effect of climate change is going to have on water availability, so therefore we can't rely on the historical record. So that's going to be a major feature of the review of the Burton Basin Water Plan. So the 150 gigalitre reserve that is currently in the Burton Basin Water Plan will be reviewed. So it may not come out as much water being available given the consequences of climate change. And then that obviously has then an impact on the potential reliability of Urannah Dam, in that if there isn't as much water available as what the proponent is currently thinking, as in what's referenced in the current Burton Basin Water Plan, if there is going to be less water, it will have an impact on the economic viability of the dam. So the other thing with water plans, as I mentioned earlier, they operationalise the objective and purpose of the Water Act, the Queensland Water Act, and essentially the main purpose of the Water Act is to ensure that the state's water resources are managed in accordance with sustainability principles. That's always a bit of a challenge for me, given that I've been working in this space for a long time, and I've got a completely different view to what sustainable water resource management is compared to what the bureaucrats in the government is. But it is something that will have to be considered when the plan's being renewed. And once again, that folds back to not just the economic viability of the dam, of Urannah Dam, but also what are its broader impacts to the environment, and also other existing water users in that system. Water plans have got to achieve the objectives of the Water Act. Water plans have specific economic ecological and cultural objectives or outcomes. So there's a whole bunch of really interesting ecological outcomes in the current plan. And the main one that I'm really interested in, and it's something that's going to get really closely examined when the plan does get renewed, is that there is a provision in there saying that through the operation of Burton Falls Dam, there can't be any decrease in flow below the dam that affects transportation of sediment out of the Burton Basin, which is then utilized through natural processes to replenish beaches north of the mouth of the Burton, and particularly for Cape Bowling Green. So what Annabelle mentioned earlier about there being very notable erosion on Cape Bowling Green, that's certainly taken place since the Burton Falls Dam has been put in place. So that provision is going to be really, really looked at. And it will also come up as a major issue in regard to what I described as the knock-on effect of if Urannah Dam's built, it's going to severely reduce flows coming through the Bowen Broken system, which then also junctions into the Burton below the dam. So if we've got a significant reduction in flows coming down through that system, plus what's already occurred as a result of the dam being built there, it can only be but yet more adverse impacts to sediment transportation out of the Burton, which will then have a further knock-on effect to Cape Bowling Green and beaches north of the mouth of the river. So the water plan is key to a lot of, I suppose, our arguments. So it's a really about opposing or not going ahead with any further construction of dams, particularly raising Burton Falls Dam and also building Urannah. Queensland government has committed to building Big Rocks Weir, which is just south of Charters Towers, but it's only a relatively small piece of water infrastructure. It'll only store about 10,000 megalitres of water, and it will literally get drowned out in big flows. And what the water plan currently, there's a major issue in regard to Hell's Gate Dam. So you're probably aware that, and Annabelle touched on it earlier. So under the water plan, the current water plan, there is no water available under the plan, and particularly in that part of the Burton Basin for Hell's Gate Dam. So with the review and replacement of the water plan coming up, the proponents for Hell's Gate Dam will probably push very hard for an allocation to be included in the new plan for Hell's Gate Dam. But the bureaucrats that I'm talking to that are responsible for putting in place all of the modelling and the science to underpin the review of the Burton Basin Water Plan are basically saying, like, in all reality, there is simply not enough water for all four of the major projects that are now on the table. And once again, those four projects are raising Burton Falls Dam, Urannah Dam, Big Rocks Weir, and Hell's Gate Dam. So just wanted to take the opportunity to raise that with you guys, that the review of the Burton Basin Water Plan is coming up. It is going to be a major component of the assessment for both Urannah and raising Burton Falls Dam, particularly in regard to whether the allocations that are in the current plan for Urannah Dam and for raising Burton Falls Dam are actually there or not. What else can I tell you? So that process for reviewing the plan, the department and the minister has to undertake detailed public consultation. So there'll be submission periods on that. There'll be workshops regionally that people can go and attend to get a better understanding of the process. And there is also potentially the option of a community reference panel being formed to advise both the department and the minister on the development of the new plan. So it's a really important process to engage in. So encourage everybody that's got an interest in this to keep an eye out for that. and engage in the process. So I'll be helping both North Queensland Conservation Council and Mackay Conservation Group sort of come to a better understanding on what's being proposed and help them put submissions together, set up meetings for them with bureaucrats and ministers and so forth. And once again, it's a critical part of the overall process to ensure that the Burton Basin doesn't become trashed like Murray-Darling as a result of too much water development.
We're talking about stopping dams, and that's something I've done for the last several years of my life on 2 dam projects. But it's clear to me that there is a wealth of knowledge on the regulations and the legislation and the threatened species in these areas, and that's a fantastic start, because often you actually don't have that to begin with, and you have to go and find it. Most of all, you've got quite an iconic little species there in that turtle that breathes through its bum. I think there's. I mean, could you think of a better pin-up species than a turtle like that?
Yeah.
But what I can speak to briefly, I don't want to take up much of people's time, is what has worked for us in New South Wales when it comes to dam projects, and how you delay them and stop them. So the first dam project that I worked on was one in the Murray-Darling Basin on the Ballabula River out in the Central West. That was for resource extraction, partly similar to what you guys are dealing with up there in Mackay. It was stopped essentially because of the cost of it. As you guys are already tackling, which is really important. And it's actually not to do so much with the environmental factors, which is a good thing in a way, because you want to avoid, in a lot of these cases, in both cases I've dealt with, you want to avoid those culture wars around dams, because especially when you're in marginal seat territory like you guys are, and as we are too in Western Sydney with Warragamba, those culture wars are quite difficult beasts to contain when they start. And I mean, there's no one in Australia knows that better than what you guys have up there with the coal mining in northern Queensland, and with a Labor government that is on the fence about most things that it could possibly be on the fence about because of that. So it's really important to try to avoid those sort of culture wars, as much as we want to talk about nature and we want to talk about cultural heritage. I think you do talk about it, of course, because that underpins the reason that you're campaigning to stop the dam, but it's probably not going to win you the argument, at least in your community. And it certainly didn't win us. It's not winning us the argument down here. We have to talk about things like the cost of the dam, its effectiveness, the alternatives, the hidden agendas behind the dam, more so than the areas to be inundated and what will be lost. Briefly, what we're dealing with at the moment with Warragamba, my organisation, the Colong Foundation for Wilderness, through its Give a Dam campaign, is trying to stop the expansion of the Warragamba Dam. They want to add 2 Sydney Harbours worth on top of what is already a 4 Sydney Harbour sized dam in Western Sydney, for flood mitigation, so they can build on houses downstream in Western Sydney, in that marginal seat territory that everyone talks about in Western Sydney. So once again, we're talking about similar politics in a way, where you have, it's a really divisive issue in that it's trying, particular politicians, in this case in the Liberal Party, trying to wedge sort of green issues versus floodplain residents about flooding and stopping flooding in Western Sydney. But what we have managed to do is to turn that argument around, because the real reason they want to raise this dam wall is so they can develop all over that floodplain, which is something that many people in Western Sydney find objectionable, much more objectionable than the flooding of World Heritage areas or cultural sites. You know, that's just what their values are. So we have to basically make sure our messaging is talking to the people, talking to what people care about, not necessarily what matters the most to the principles or the objectives of our organisation, because we want to stop a dam first and foremost. We don't want to signal virtues that no one else is going to, that people aren't going to listen to. So, I mean, that's one element of it. The other primary reason that I think I think a good campaign entails, dams or otherwise, is making sure you weed out the support from non-government actors. So, as Annabelle is fully aware, this, and I'm sure everyone around the screen, that this is not because it would seem this dam is not going ahead because a particular minister or a particular bureaucrat in government wants it to happen. There's a whole lot of corporate forces and actors around this proposal, and they're the ones driving it. Even though a minister may need to approve it, they're simply, at the end of the day, a puppet of someone else in another position, be it a donor or a large agribusiness or a coal miner. Now, you guys, once again, will know all about this with Adani, but it is not about necessarily going after your consent authority or what the legislation or regulation says. It's going for the person or the people or the corporation who is actually driving the agenda for the threatening process, i.e., your Cotter Junior or the various coal mines or agribusiness around the dam, and that's proved very successful for us. We've been working with the insurance industry in the case of Western Sydney to ensure that they're fully across the impacts of the project and the lies that are essentially being propagated by the government about the effectiveness of the dam project. And we've spoken to them about the alternatives and, of course, the impacts that would happen upstream if this dam project in Western Sydney was to proceed. And they have since changed their position on the entire project. So that has been, that causes once an industry or a key proponent, non-government proponent of a project ceases to actually give support, the dynamics of dealing with government and the dynamics of the cabinet room change dramatically, and that's without even engaging with them. I'm not saying we don't engage with them, but there's a whole lot of forces at play, and it's important to know who they are, and then target your campaign accordingly, and using the right messaging. So, I mean, that's sort of in essence what we've been doing. But I wish everyone the best of luck. These dam projects are sometimes take a very long time to stop, but just take a huge amount of effort from campaigners and activists and groups and lots of money to make happen. And they're often a very long road, but at the end of the day, you hopefully will succeed.
Thank you. And thank you for coming in and speaking to us. As you said, there's lots of different ways I think that people can be involved, not just from what Nigel spoke about earlier, by sending submissions to try to actually change the legislation. And as you said, change the opinions of the powers that be, but also following where the money's coming from, who's actually some of the private enterprises around this, who are the insurance, who's going to be the developers, and pressuring them on a really public level.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And you all the supporters, all the Mackay, all the great, all the members of the Mackay Conservation Group. I mean, you are the guys who can make this happen and create that. Make sure that the public in your local community and abroad, out and across Australia, are actually aware and are targeting those key companies or individuals when you decide who they are. But that's the power of campaigning, and I think you're well armed, and you've got some great campaigners and experts making that happen. So best of luck.
Whether you're local to Mackay or you're tuning in from somewhere else in Australia or even abroad, there are so many ways that you can get involved in helping us to protect Urannah Creek from threats to dam it. please visit us at saveurannah.org.au/volunteer, put in your details, and as those opportunities do arise, we will be reaching out so that you know how you can help. It is really appreciated, even if you can only help for 5 minutes once a month. We need you.